My name's Erin Moore. I attend the Vigil Mass with my family, and I help out with music ministry and the parish council. My children are 7, 5, and 2. So parents in the crowd will know what I mean when I say that we just passed the high holy day of childhood. Of course, I'm referring to Halloween. The buildup was incredible the whole month. Let's figure out the costumes. Let's talk about the costumes. James even wanted to print off a map of the neighborhood and plan out his route for maximum candy. So it's Halloween night, and we're out trick-or-treating. And at one house in our neighborhood, there's a person sitting in one of those large blow-up costumes to hand out candy. They were dressed as a blow-up unicorn. It was pretty comical because they were sitting in a chair in their driveway and then they would like hobble up to give out the candy. As we were approaching, James turns to me and says, "Well, let's go trick or treat from that unicorn." Sounds kind of weird, but I guess we're doing it. How many stories in the Bible could you describe in the same way? Sounds kind of weird, but I guess we're doing it. Put this baby in the river. Get water from this rock. Fight Goliath. Here's a slingshot. Fill these jugs with water and pour out wine. Get out of that boat and walk on the water. Roll back the stone. Trust this Saul guy. I know he killed your family and friends, but he's really working on himself lately. I think he started to meditate. Sounds kind of weird, but I guess we're doing it. Our first reading from Kings is a classic example of this madness. The widow is just trying to survive, ration, keep enough to stay alive. And yet this guest comes to her town saying that she can give up everything she's saved and still have enough, still be fed. She tries to explain, she tries to be practical, but then something shifts. She stops holding on so tightly and decides, okay, let's just try something crazy. And it's in that leap, in letting go, in giving up the ways of this world and not playing by the rules, that her faith saves her. The widow and her son couldn't survive until she was willing to give up everything. The gospel story is very much of the same spirit. Everyone gives to the treasury, but Jesus notices the widow that gives all that she has. Now, just a St. Lucy side note here. Why is it that women are always either widows or virgins? Like, can we be nothing else? Like, must we always be defined by our relationship status with a man? But I digress. The point I should celebrate is that it's through women that God is revealed. So often the women are the ones who are willing to empty themselves, pour out their very soul, and have space to welcome God. Think of Mary, a teenager alone in her room when the angel Gabriel appears. He tells a story that sounds kind of weird, but she knows in her heart it comes from God. It's not the ways of this world. It's beyond our comprehension, but she empties herself. She lays down her plans for life, her reputation, possibly her marriage, and she brings God into the world. The widow giving to the treasury gives all that she has, and no one notices, except for one person. So how can we be like these women? The widows in our stories today were living in poverty, yet willing to give all that they had. Blessed are the poor in spirit. In each of our lives, what can we lay down and empty out to make room for God working in us? Where can we try something that just sounds a little bit crazy? Crazy like Dorothy Day in the 1920s, called to work with the poor. She found herself drawn to the Catholic Church, even though her radical peacemaking friends could not understand that. By chance, she came to befriend Peter Morin, who had this crazy vision but Dorothy had the skills to actually make it happen. Together, they created the Catholic Worker newspaper and opened houses of hospitality. Living among the poor people that she loved sounded a little weird to so many people in her life. Yet she had to lay down her life, give of her whole self to find where God was leading her. Crazy like the Jesuits. In 1996, they started the first Cristo Rey school in Chicago to serve the poor students who were dropping out of high school at alarming rates. The Jesuits didn't have the money. They didn't have an endowment. They didn't even have a building for the kids to come to. But they had a dream and trusted it came from God and just decided to try something a little crazy. Today, 23,000 students have graduated from Cristo Rey schools around the country and have been the first in their families to go to college and break the cycle of poverty. Here in Syracuse, John Tomino was driving home, contemplating what to do with his life, when he saw a homeless man on the off-ramp and just heard the words, "This man thinks he's invisible." He went and bought that man a meal, parked his car, and went out and spoke with him. Doing something a little crazy that day changed John's life. He and his wife started In My Father's Kitchen and dedicated their lives to getting people off the streets, building relationships that start with food but go much deeper to the heart. But he had to first be willing to let go of this world. He gave up his restaurant. He gave up prestige. He emptied himself. Try something crazy like Sheila Austin. She was living a blessed life. She was a nurse at St. Joe's, married to a doctor, lived in the suburbs. She played a lot of golf. She never drove on South Salina Street because it terrified her. But in her blessed life, she was questioning, why am I not happy? She'd been away from church for many years, but she felt drawn back. She wandered into St. James's Church in the Valley, and then she decided to join the choir so she would have something to do and not feel so awkward. Her priest saw something in her and said, "Sheila, I want you to head up the new outreach program that we're going to start." She was reluctant, but something in her made her say yes. She and other parishioners started bringing sandwiches that they made to the men's shelter. Her priest said, "Okay, that's great. What do you know about the men who are eating these sandwiches?" And Sheila said, I don't know. We bring them to the door. Someone comes to the door and gets the sandwiches and brings them in. And he said, "That's where you start." She reflected later, having the face-to-face encounter, getting to know who it is that we're being kind to, helped me see that everybody's the same. It doesn't matter if you're drug addicted, struggling with mental illness, poor, homeless, we're really all the same. So she got over her fear of driving on South Salina Street, and she helped to found Road to Emmaus Ministry. She started washing the feet of the homeless, first on Holy Thursday, but then every month, because she realized that they needed it more often. And in the year 2020, she and her team made 32,000 meals for the people on the south side of Syracuse. Crazy like my husband, Steve, he's a good example. He was doing pretty well as a psychologist at Upstate. He had the state retirement plan and everything. But then a conversation with Jim Kreischer made him think about the Spiritual Renewal Center. He said to me one night, "You know what a dream job would be for me? The Spiritual Renewal Center, but I wouldn't do that because of money." Well, you can guess what advice I gave him. Turns out God doesn't care too much about your retirement plan when he puts these inspirations in your heart. And I could go on about the good people that we have here saying yes to crazy things. Andrew Lunetta, with no carpentry skills, deciding he's going to start building tiny homes for those without one. Kevin and Emily asking, if we are going to follow Jesus, where would he go? Let's go there. Marilyn riding bicycles with the homeless 3 times a week. Sister Pat getting special permission to live on Gifford Street among the community here. Father Jim driving all over the city to visit people who call him on the phone, telling him they're in need. Sounds kind of weird, but I guess we're doing it. Recently, I made a decision to go back to school yet again to pursue my Ed.D., a doctorate in educational leadership at Lemoyne. You don't have to tell me, I know that's crazy. I have a full-time job. I have 2 music ministry jobs to boot. I have 3 little kids. But my old spiritual director kept pushing me with the question of, okay, what's next? And the inspiration came together at the right time. I don't know where this yes is going to lead me, but I'm trying to stay open and allow for the question. What I'm trying to learn and trust in my life is that if God gives you the vision, she will provide the provisions. If your crazy dreams really are from God, she will provide what you need. It's not always at the time we plan for. It's not always in the way that we pictured. But God will lead us where she needs us to be if we are willing to empty ourselves and make room. The Jesuit writer William Briel has a beautiful image that speaks to this in his poem. A cup must be empty before it can be filled. If it is already full, it can't be filled again except by emptying it out. In order to fill anything, there must be a hollowed out space. Otherwise, it can't receive. This is especially true of God's word. In order to receive it, we must be hollowed out. We must be capable of receiving it. Emptied of the false self and its endless demands. When Christ came, there was no room at the inn. It was full. The inn is a symbol of the heart. God's word, Christ, can only take root in a hollow. Like that widow holding on to her last bit of flour, we're all holding on to something that we can lay down and empty out. Our ego, our expectations, our plans, our judgments, our disappointments. We're called to go against the ways of this world that tell us to care about money and pride. We're called to believe in things that we cannot see or prove. We're called to love a God who is silent. We're called to lay down our nets, take up our crosses, and follow a man who welcomes the outcasts and the sinners, and he himself who is willing to die as a convicted criminal. We're called to believe that life doesn't end with death. Sounds kind of weird, but I guess we're doing it.